Hello friends, welcome back. Now let's talk about the WP Object Cache class and the plugin that installs the object cache.php file. It is a drop-in. A drop-in is a way to override some of the core functionality of WordPress. We can do this by adding the files into the WP content directory, and there are multiple drop-ins available. One of these drop-ins is the object cache.php file. The file name should remain the same. So let me open the object cache.php file. So if the object cache.php drop-in exists inside of the WP content directory, it will be loaded instead of the core WordPress WP object cache class. Now, let me search for the object cache.php file. Here, in plugin.php, you can see that there are multiple drop-ins available. For example, advanced cache, db.php, dberror.php. You can go through the list of drop-ins inside of the WP includes plugin.php file. Now we want to check where this file is loaded. So let me just copy the part to this file and we will do a search. And inside of the load.php, you can see that the WP start object cache function is called, and this function initializes the object cache. Now let's search for where this function is executed. So you can see in WP settings.php, this function is called along with the other WordPress request. This function initializes the object cache in the WordPress. So again, in load.php, we can see that this function checks if the enable loading object cache drop-in filter is true. By default, this filter is true, but we can set it to false if we want. And it is the first init. So this executes on the first call. So it checks if this file exists, which is object cache.php. And if this file exists, it simply requires that file. And then it checks if the function wp cache init exists. If the function exists, then it uses the WP using external object cache and passes true as the argument. Now this function sets a global variable confirming that we are using object cache in the WordPress installation. Now if we go ahead, you can see that if we are not using the object cache, then the default cache.php file is used. Now let me close other files. We will take a look at object cache.php file. And let me open the outline for better visibility. You can see that this file implements all of the functions which are present in cache.php file. So these functions are similar to the ones in cache.php, but the wp cache.php file won't be loaded because this plugin that install the object cache needs to initialize the required functions like wp cache get, wp cache add, etc. These functions have been overridden by the Redis object cache plugin we installed. Additionally, the plugin also installs the WP object cache class. This class will connect the Redis object cache to save and get the cache data. Now, I'm not going to get into the exact implementation because it would be very time consuming, but plugins for object cache like the one for Memcached interact with the PHP extensions or libraries to connect with the object cache system. So you can see there are multiple Redis libraries supported like HHVM, PHP Redis, and it uses the libraries to connect with these extensions. Now let us go through a practical example. So let's take a look at the WP cache add function. So it calls the add method on the WP object cache object. So let's search for the add method. Internally, it calls add or replace. So let's go to the function implementation of add or replace. It calls the WP suspend cache addition function. Now we can suspend the cache addition if we want, and this will disable the cache adding by calling this function. This feature is useful when installing or migrating data because during this time, WordPress functions are used to store data in the database. If you use the WordPress function, it will also save the data using the WP cache functions into the object cache. This can slow down the process, so you can suspend the cache by calling this function if required. We can also suspend the cache invalidation by calling this WP suspend cache invalidation function. We can just enable it by passing suspend as true or false. The object cache drop-in supports this as well. So let's take a look at the function. It builds the key, and finally it calls the set method on the Redis object. So let's search for the set method. We can see it uses the Redis library to set data into the Redis system. Now I am using default Redis server, which uses the port 6379, which is the default address for connecting. Using this information, WordPress will connect with the Redis server to get and cache data. I know this process might seem a bit tricky or unclear about how the drop-in works, but after installing it and going through the files, you will get a better understanding of how it functions. In short, WordPress provides object caching, but by default it is non-persistent, meaning the data is only available for that particular request and not across multiple requests. To override this, we need to add the object cache.php file, which is a drop-in into the WP content directory to override the default WP object cache functions. This allows us to implement our own object caching system. That's all about object caching. You can try it on your local system and explore the code further. You can also check the developer documentation at developer.wordpress.org to see more information about the WP object cache class. There are also other functions available. You can explore them more. You may find some filters or actions that you can help in your implementation. Thanks everyone. See you in the next video. Jai WordPress.